What's up everyone? Today I want to talk about one of the greatest endgame Necromancer builds in Season 4, and it's a full summoner Necromancer build that can beat every single bit of content at endgame. This build can clear level 100 nightmare dungeons, super high levels of the pit so you can fully masterwork all your gear, and it can easily beat level 200 tormented bosses. In fact, our golem can fully one-shot some bosses. There has never been a better time to be a full summoner Necromancer, so let's get straight into how this build works. The playstyle of this build is to fully buff and strengthen and empower our minions, to the point where our job is just setting them up to deal more damage. We throw down a huge Decrepify to curse the ground, we use corpse tendrils to suck everything together and increase our crit, and then we just let our minions get to work. When everything is grouped up, we're also in control of our golem's main ability, which is just smash. We just smash everything on the screen. Our golem is so strong because of what we do in the Paragon Board and with tempering, which we'll get into later in the video. So while our minions are all at work, our golem has this really small cooldown on its main ability, and its main ability has around 2,500% damage bonus. And on top of all this, we also use Blood Mist, which makes us fully invincible. So yeah, this is a amazing endgame build, but if you're looking for more of a leveling build, I do have a full Necromancer leveling build, which I'll link down below. Okay, so now let's get into this build, starting with the skill tree. Okay, so here's the build. It's all linked down below, everything you need, so you can come back to this whenever you want, the gear, the stats, some tips on how to play, everything like that. But let's start with the skill tree. And I'm going to go into quite a bit of depth here because there's some things we do here that might not make sense unless I explain like why we take them or where they are used, because some things we don't take on our hotbar, but we have ways to use them. So I'm going to go over that. If you just want the quick version, it's down below. Okay, first up, we need to put 2 points in a basic ability. I put them here. It doesn't matter. This doesn't go on our hotbar. We don't use it, but we need to put 2 points in here. So we'll knock the next section. In the next section, we do not use a core skill, so we need to put 4 points in. I put 3 points into Hewed Flesh to have a chance to form a corpse at the target's location, doubled on bosses, and then 1 point in there for extra essence. Moving down, I'll explain this section because it doesn't really make sense without explaining. So we put a point into Corpse Explosion, which deals damage, explodes dealing damage. Then we enhance it for a more radius, and we take Blighted. Corpse Explosion becomes a darkness skill, and instead of exploding, releases a vile miasma, dealing shadow damage over time. Now, there are certain things in this build which work well with shadow damage or damage over time, so that's a really good ability to have. But we don't have it on our hotbar, and I'm going to explain why in a sec. So next we take Blood Mist, and this is our invincibility button. We press that, you become invincible, and you heal. We enhance it, and then we take Ghastly. Blood Mist leaves behind a corpse every 1 second. Now, the reason this is so good is because we go invincible and we start dropping corpses around, but we use the explosive mist aspect as well. And that means that when we're in the Blood Mist form, we also trigger Corpse Explosion. So what we do is we go in, we cast this is on our hotbar, we go invincible and we float around and we trigger all the corpses, leaving a vile miasma. So it's perfect. We basically get 2 abilities for the price of 1, not on our hotbar, but gets used by this. Really, really good. An easy way to get more damage and trigger certain effects. Okay, and then onto the curses, we take the Decrepify here. 1 point, curse the area, enemies afflicted by the Decrepify are slowed by 40% and deal less damage for 10 seconds. If we had more points, we'd put more points here, but we're kind of stretched with what we do here, so I just put 1 in. Feel free to put more in if you want. And then we enhance it, and we take Abhorrent. Enemies hit while afflicted by Decrepify have a 15% chance to reduce your active cooldowns, which can reduce our golem ability, it can reduce our Blood Mist, really, really powerful. We also take Amplified Damage, 12% increased damage to curse enemies. So what we get with this is we constantly cast this all the time. No, don't worry about the cooldown, constant use. We get slow the enemy, they do less damage, and we do more damage to them. So it's really, really powerful for like, what, 6 points? Huge. Down here, we take Corpse Tendrils. You burst a corpse, exploding, pulling enemies in and dealing damage. And then up here, enemies damaged by tendrils are made vulnerable. So when you see at the start, we pull all the enemies in and then they just melt because they're all vulnerable for 3 seconds. So that's a huge damage boost. Pull them in, get them vulnerable, and then hit them with your golem, hit them with all your minions, massive damage. Then down here, we take Army of the Dead. Call forth volatile skeletons that deal damage. And all the way down here, Army of the Dead also raises your warriors and mages. So if you get on a boss, if your minions take a ton of damage, you pop this, not only is it a massive damage boost, but it also brings everyone back into the fight. And then for our ultimate, we take Shadow Blight. Shadow damage inflicts enemies with Shadow Blight for 2 seconds. Every 10th time you and your minions are affected by Shadow Blight, they take an additional 22% Shadow damage. Shadow Blight's damage is increased by 100% of your Shadow damage over time bonus, which is why Shadow damage over time is so important. This is a really, really powerful ability and works well in this build. Okay, and then let's talk about some passives. So we want to take all of these. Everything you see here, look. Skeletal Warrior, 45% more Skeletal Warrior damage. Down here, Skeletal Mage, 60% mage damage. We take a couple of points here. to give us a 45 when a corpse is formed, and we take 3 points here, 75% golem damage. And then we have these two clusters here. We have this cluster here of shadow damage. I go 1-3-3 as it gives us more shadow damage, damage to slowed enemies, which they become slowed from our curse. So I think this is really good for ramping up our shadow damage over time, and it works well with Shadow Blight. And then down here, we want to empower our minions. If you want to move more points into one area than another, you can try it. I find this to be the best. I've moved these around a lot and I find this works the best. 1 point in here, 3 points in there, 3 points in there. Now, if you find you're playing different, you're not close to your minions, you can drop 3 points out of there, move it up there, drop it into here to give them more armor. But yeah, that's the skill tree. Feel free to change anything. Let me know in the comments if you do anything differently, but this has worked on level 200, tormented bosses, 100 nightmares, high pit runs, and I'm happy with it. Okay, now onto the Book of the Dead. And this is tailored more around empowering our golem. It funnels a lot of things into golem damage, rather than spreading us thin on sort of everything else. So on the warriors, we go Reapers, and we take Reaper's wind-up attacks now reduce one of your active cooldowns by 3 seconds. It can reduce your golem's cooldown, and it can reduce your blood mist, things like that. On the mages, we go Shadow, and we take this one. You deal 3% increased damage for each active Shadow mage, and then we go Golem, and we take this one here, the Golem, the Blood Golem. Your Blood Golem heals itself when its active ability. You are healed 5% of your max life for each enemy drained. While your Blood Golem is healthy, which it will be a lot, they gain 25% damage reduction and 50% increased damage. So when we talk about these big, 2,000, I think it was like 2,800% Golem damage, boosted on bosses, boosted by 50% again here, it just all adds up. It's just massive damage on the Golem, and it just gets us through the big boss fights that a lot of other classes struggle with. So that's the Book of the Dead. You can change it, like this is good. Have 15% chance to carve the flesh off of enemies if you want to get more, corpse explosion-y with it. But this is what I think works best with how we have the skill tree laid out. Okay, so let's talk about the aspects and the uniques. Now, first up, the ones that go in specific areas. The weapon, I would get a two-handed weapon and put Blighted aspect on it. You deal up to 120% increased damage, which is a 200% boost on a 200 weapon. For 6 seconds after the Shadow Blight key passive damages enemies 10 times. This is a massive damage boost. You can track the ticks of this at the bottom as well, like how far along that boost is going to be before it lands. And then you can time that with your Golem attack. However, if you can get your Golem cooldown down low enough, you can just keep pressing Golem attacks so often that you will line up with this a lot more often. You'll hit this a lot more, and you'll see a much bigger damage increase, which is why the two work so well together. Then on the neck, I would go for Aspect of Reanimation. Your minions gain increased damage while alive up to 40% after 10 seconds. If you play this right, if you take the right defensives, if you play the Paragon Board right, like I'm going to show you, you will have minions alive for a very long time. So you'll get that 40% damage increase a lot. So really well, worth the 150% for having it on an amulet. Okay, now let's go down the left side. So on the helmet, a lot of these are almost mandatory, but I've put some other things down here if you want to try different things I've tried and things that I think worked well. But here's what I would say are almost mandatory. Number one, Hulking aspect. Your Golem has a chance to reduce its active cooldown by 2 seconds and a chance to spawn a corpse. Getting the cooldown reduced means you can cast it more damage. Huge. I keep going over Golem cooldown because it's that important. That's why we need this. Aspect of Cult Dominion. You gain 2 more warriors, 2 more mages. Perfect. Can't think of a minion build without this. Aspect of Grasping Vines. You gain increased crit damage and crit strike whenever you use Grasping Vines, which means that when we cast that, we gain crit strike, crit damage, and we make them vulnerable, which is what the ability actually does. So that leads to a massive burst of damage as soon as they come together. Hardened Bones keeps our minions alive longer. Explosive Mist is the one we've talked about, which lets us cast when we go into a mist and hover over all the corpses, we'll automatically cast Corpse Explosion without having it on our bar, which gives us a free ability, which is incredible. And then on the rings. So there are some amazing Necromancer rings and necks, to be honest, but this is the only one I would recommend in this build. Ring of the Sacrilegious Soul. You automatically activate the following equipped skills on corpses around you. It will only do Raised Skeleton and Corpse Tendrils because we do not have Corpse Explosion on our bar. You can try and put this on your bar in place of Army of the Dead if you want to. It would work, but because we have Blood Mist, we can trigger Corpse Explosions ourselves, and because we're laying damage over time, we don't really need that many of them. So I think this works perfectly, but feel free to change it if you want. The reason this is so good is it will raise a skeleton every 1 second. If we already have maximum amount of skeletons, it will raise a skeletal priestess, whatever they're called, which will buff all our minions, and that gives them a damage boost. So It's incredible. We get a free boost every second, and it will cast corpse tendrils every up to 8 seconds, which again is a massive damage boost as we've shown here. So this is just a massive win. If you're doing stuff like high pits or bosses, you have so much to worry about: moving around, positioning, golem attack, going into blood mist, moving around the boss, that triggering the raised skeleton, triggering the corpse tendrils, having that just go off for you is really, really good. Then on the second ring, you've got some options here. I like Unyielding Commander. While Army of the Dead is active, your minions gain increased damage. You know, it means that when you build up some blighted, when you build up to the blighted buff, when you cast the Grasping Vines and pull them all in, and then if you smash Unyielding Commander, if you smash, what's it called? Army of the Dead at that exact time, you have so many buffs on at once that when your golem attacks, it is just insane. That's when you see these clips of people one-hitting bosses with a golem. It's from lining all those buffs up together. But that's the build. I put some other things down here that you can try if you want to try different aspects, things that I've tried. But this is how I think it works best. I've tried a lot, and this feels like the most damage and the most balanced for pretty much all endgame content. Okay, then we've also got some gear stats. So you have a lot of damage you can get out of your gear, especially with the new tempering. So it's all here, so I don't want to read out line by line, but here are the main things you want to be looking for. When you're looking for things on your gear, certain items can roll Golem Mastery, certain items can roll like Skeletal Mage Mastery, and those all tie up to this. Those all tie up to these. So when you see like Golem Mastery, that's this here. So it's every time you see Golem Mastery, that's 25% more damage. So when we get the option down here to take ranks to Golem Mastery, you're getting an increase in golem damage. So every chance you get, you take Skeletal Warrior Mastery, Golem Mastery, Mage Mastery, Mage Mastery. You want to take that everywhere you can get it. That'd be number one. The other things you can take are cooldown reduction to bring down the timing on our Golem's ability and to bring down the timing on Blood Mist. You want crit chance and crit strike wherever you can get it. On our amulet, we can also get amplified damage, which increases damage to cursed enemies. And then that's it really. Attack speed is good. If they inherit your attack speed, that's more damage. And then just fill out with what you need. You're in charge of your own build. If you've got low armor, pick up some armor. If you've got low resistances, try and pick up some resistances. Whatever you need can fill the gaps. But that's it. And then on your tempers, these are all here as well. So what you want to temper is anywhere you can temper offensive abilities, golem damage. So you can see here, anything offensive, you want golem damage. Anything resource, you want to reduce golem's active cooldown. So we can do that on our ring. We can do it on our weapons. Anywhere you can increase golem damage, you want to do that. And then in the other spots, we can do things like Blood Mist cooldown, or you can get Blood Mist duration. You can get increase the size of corpse tendrils, increase the size of corpse explosion. All these things just catch more enemies. It's like throwing a wider net to catch more enemies in your big curses, in your big corpse explosions, in your tendrils to bring them in. That can go into like utility. It's up to you what you want to go for. I've gone for a little bit of each, a little bit of corpse explosion size, a little bit of tendril size. That's it. You get movement speed on your feet. Minion attack speed's good as well, but that's it. That's a broad thing of what you should be looking for. The main ones I've mentioned. Everything else is here if you want to tailor it exactly to this, but that's the gear stats. Okay, lastly, let's talk about the Paragon Board. So I've tried to find a balance here between getting enough glyphs. So we've got 6 boards and 6 glyphs, and then getting enough detail in these boards that we're getting what we want. So starting from the start, we go into the Mage glyph. This gives us skeletal mage damage, but also gives us minions have increased resistances. Having our minions alive means they do more damage. So important. On to the next one, Cult Leader. Cult Leader is good for a first board because it's perfect to branch out of. We want to hit all these nodes here. We want to hit minion damage, attack speed, mage damage, resistances. We want to hit minion damage, minion attack speed. All these things we want to hit as we move out. Then I took these here and I took the legendary, increased damage and increased attack speed. On the glyph, Dead Razor, increase minion damage and damage reduction. And whenever your minions deal damage, the enemies take more damage, which is perfect. On the way up, we go into Hulking Monstrosity. Again, one we have to be quite invested in because it's our golem. And on the node, we take increased all magical nodes, which are golem nodes. So you see here, we get a boost to all the golem nodes, all the golem armor and the golem damage. And then we get a boost to curse. Enemies take more damage if cursed, which is perfect. If you want to be a little extra here, you can go down and get this cluster as well. It's really good. Golem attack speed and golem damage, it's really good. I just couldn't find room for it. If you want to take out of somewhere else and put somewhere, that's where you should put. But anyway, then we go and get the legendary. Your golem has increased max life and deals 100% increased damage. pretty much mandatory in this build. Take some more damage on the way out, and we go into Flesh Eater. Flesh Eater, we go in and get the node. I put in Corporeal, increased to the magic nodes, which is like damage to elites and resistances. And then your minions deal increased damage and you gain movement speed. Grab the node here, Consuming Corpses gives you increased damage. That's kind of the end of that board. Then we come back to Cult Leader, we go out this side, and we get Wither, get the node here. Every willpower purchase gives you golem damage, huge. You want to head down out of that board into Scent of Death. We go for control, increased damage to crowd control targets, such as the slow we get from our curse. And then we fill it out, and you can go and get the one there. With at least 2 nearby corpses, you gain damage reduction. With no corpses, you deal increased damage. Either of them is a win-win. This is how I've laid it out. There is a ton of things you can change here. Things you might not think are worth it. You might want to play more into shadow damage. You might want to play less. You might want to play more into your golem. You might want to play less into your mages. There's a lot of things you can do here. If you are focusing purely on pit runs, you might want to tweak it a little bit. Purely on bosses, you might want to tweak it. But this clears everything. If you're trying to get world first 200 clear on the pit, maybe tweak it. But this clears pretty much everything you will need to, finish the end game as it is. So yeah, I'm happy with it. It works, but there's room for change for certain things. But that's the Paragon board, and that's the build. If you like this build, consider subscribing to the channel. I've been making a ton of builds over Diablo. I also make guides, reviews for lots of other RPGs and MMOs. So if you like that sort of stuff, do consider subscribing. If you have any questions or comments on the build as a whole, let me know in the comments. But that's it from me. Take care. I'll catch you in the next one.